Hello everyone, welcome to my Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Jedi Grandmaster difficulty, no damage, no upgrades, no perks walkthrough. This will cover Coruscant, which is the first level of the game, and right now we are starting off with a walking sequence that is meant to establish the status quo, the current state of the galaxy, and the fact that the Empire has been in power for some time. But I'm going to use this introduction to explain how this walkthrough is going to go. So this is the first time I'm ever doing a walkthrough of a Star Wars Jedi game, and you might be wondering why I didn't start with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and I'm just skipping directly to this game. Well, mainly because of the fact that the introduction to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order isn't as friendly to the idea of a no damage walkthrough, because of the fact that there are a lot of unskippable cutscenes, and also you don't have any meditation points, you're just relying upon checkpoints, and I just feel like I'm not going to be able to put up with taking damage and then editing that out and then trying to get the necessary footage to do no damage and then compiling all the footage together, and it would just make the footage look very weird, and that's why I was pretty averse to that idea. And also I feel like Jedi Fallen Order is a better game than Jedi Survivor, and I feel like it makes more sense to start with the game that is weaker in comparison to the other game. So that's another reason why I'm doing Star Wars Jedi Survivor. And the final reason why I'm doing this walkthrough first is because I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos related to Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and I've been attached to my blind playthrough of Jedi Survivor, so obviously that's just going to lead to a lot of intrigue towards doing a walkthrough of Jedi Survivor, so those represent the reasons why I'm doing this walkthrough. With that all said, let me talk about Jedi Grandmaster difficulty and the rest of these restrictions. So Jedi Grandmaster difficulty is the hardest difficulty on this game. The enemies are going to do a lot of damage to you. You're not going to do a lot of damage to the enemies. You can get perks and increase your lightsaber damage significantly, but of course I'm not going to be using the perks in this game. And then the parry timings are going to be a lot more strict, but that's pretty standard stuff in a typical Souls game, because this game is trying to recreate the Souls formula using Star Wars, and I gotta say, I enjoy this game and Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order more so than the Souls games, honestly, and I need to explain why when I get to the later parts of this video and in the later parts of this walkthrough. But talking about the restrictions, so no damage, obviously I'm trying to showcase the game at its best, I'm trying to showcase better methods to allow you to get through this game very easily, and of course doing the no damage restriction is meant to showcase the full potential of the game. There are certain parts on this game where you can take mandatory damage, or the damage can be very random, but I'm going to exclude those from the walkthrough and I'll explain them when they occur. And then the no upgrades thing. This game does have a skill tree system where you can go to meditation points and slot your skill points into abilities, but I don't feel like the abilities are needed. And honestly, a lot of the abilities that I've played around with are very useless, and I've seen a lot of YouTube videos showcasing how amazing the abilities are, but I just cannot get the game to work the way I want it to, and that's why I'm not using the abilities. I feel like in Jedi Fallen Order, there were situations where using the abilities was necessary, especially for Dathomir, because Dathomir had those Night Brothers, and the Night Brothers were probably one of the most annoying enemy types ever, and then they had those Bane Spiders, which were the ones that fired acid at you, and they came in higher numbers. Like, that has to be the most dangerous enemy type ever in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. You heard me right there, guys. That is the most dangerous enemy type in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I never thought such a tiny enemy could be so dangerous in that kind of game, but it's true. But getting back on track with Jedi Survivor, I don't feel like the upgrades are needed whatsoever to get through the story, and this walkthrough is only going to focus on the story missions. I will be ignoring all the side activities, because I don't feel like they're needed, and honestly, guys, I don't even know why they brought the open world in. I don't like the open world in Jedi Fallen Order, and I don't like it in Jedi Survivor. I mean, the story that they're trying to tell is built better in the framework of a linear game rather than an open world game. I mean, why do they need all that? It's just so unnecessary, if you ask me. I mean, lasers would disagree with me, but in my opinion, I don't think the open world is good in Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, so that's definitely an added incentive for me not to do the side missions, and the story missions are obviously the most important missions to worry about in this kind of walkthrough. Oh, by the way, right here, this is one of the moments where you can take mandatory damage. It's random whether you take damage or not, but I'm not counting it. I know someone's going to say it's poorly designed, or they're going to try to find some of the stupidest methods possible to avoid damage, and I did see such a method like that to avoid damage consistently, but why would you ever waste time with that? It's such a minuscule amount of damage. This is why I don't like any of the hitless groups or the people that just take no damage so seriously to the point where, oh, they call it so badly designed when you take mandatory damage like that. I mean, just don't take damage from everything else. I mean, I'm not going to elaborate on this point because I've already elaborated on this point in my other walkthroughs. But if I had taken damage right there, I wouldn't have cared, and I would just moved on. But getting back on track, the no perks thing. So perks are passive abilities that you can find out in the open world, and they're also found after certain boss fights. But I'm not going to be using them because I also found them to be completely pointless. But it's nice that they're there, and same with the skill upgrades as well. Oh, by the way, right here, when you interact with your first meditation point, the game will force you to buy an upgrade. And the way I'm going to handle this is I'm going to slot this into an ability I will never use. So I'm going to slot this into the single stance upgrade where you hold triangle to do a lunging strike. I never use this ability. I never find the need to use any of the force attacks, as I don't like any of them. And obviously when you're in the blaster stance, you just fire your blaster, and the blaster stance is my favorite stance in the game. And that's something you gotta recognize with Jedi Survivor. There are more stances this time around. In Jedi Fallen Order, you only had access to the single and double-bladed stance. And then the split saber stance was relegated to one special ability. But now, in this game, you have access to, I believe, 5 stances. So you have the single-bladed stance, the double-bladed stance, the split saber stance, the crossguard stance, and the blaster stance. So the only stances you'll ever need to use are the single-bladed stance because the game forces you to use it in this introduction, the double-bladed stance because it's necessary to deal with any enemy that uses a blaster, and you'll be dealing with lots of enemies using blasters at the same time. And when you have the double-bladed stance and you reflect blaster bolts back, like you reflect a cluster of blaster bolts back, you only have to press L1 once at the right moment and just hold it the entire time, and you'll reflect all those blaster bolts back. It's really helpful, and there are just so many combat situations where you're dealing with enemies that have blasters alongside melee enemies, or just whole groups of blaster enemies, and having the double blade stance makes it less tedious and less frustrating. And then the split saber stance is kind of optional. I don't really use it that much. I know it has some cool perks, but I don't really find the incentive to use it. The crossguard stance is the worst stance in the game, and it is the slowest stance. It's like you're wielding a great sword, pretty much, and you know how slow great swords are in Dark Souls or in Bloodborne, for instance, and they're normally pretty useless that way, although in Dark Souls there's probably some utility for heavy weapons, but there is no utility for the heavy weapons whatsoever in Jedi Survivor. And the worst part about the crossguard stance is that it just complements an existing issue prevalent throughout Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which is the hyper armor. But I'll talk more about the hyper armor in the later parts of this video, or in the later parts of this walkthrough. But then you have the blaster stance, and the blaster stance is obviously the best because you're able to fire a blaster and you deal with enemies at long range, and it just helps in lessening the frustration that can occur when you're dealing with multiple enemies at the same time. And if there's one thing that is prevalent throughout the entire Souls series and also in Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, it's that the combat systems that they favor just aren't befitting for fighting multiple enemies. And at least in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, the Force abilities, as well as some lightsaber abilities, definitely help a bit in dealing with multiple enemies, but not to a degree that is really that beneficial. And that's definitely one of the things I can appreciate about this game series compared to the Souls games. And it definitely goes to show that they aren't embracing poor designs as much as the Souls games when trying to come up with the whole idea of difficulty. But getting back on track, the blaster stance and the double-bladed stance are really the only stances you'll need for the most part. I mean, there can be some situations where you'll want to switch to single stance, but honestly, I don't think that's necessary. And, like, the single stance and the blaster stance are pretty similar with each other in terms of their speed, in terms of their combos, although there are just a lot more moments with the blaster stance when I'm using the lightsaber where I cannot stop Cal from attacking because it stacks my inputs like crazy. Whereas with the single stance, at least I can use the block more effectively to cancel my combos, which is helpful. But yeah, that's precisely why I use blaster stance and the double-bladed stance. And right here, if you hug the right-hand side and then you slide down and then hide right over here, Bode will take out all of these enemies. And the AI is really good on this game when dealing with the enemies, and they can't die, which is good. Right here, the reason why I'm not taking any damage from the falls is because I have the option enabled where I do not take fall damage. It's definitely an important option to enable, just so you don't get screwed so much by the falls. Because there can be those situations where it looks like you're not going to die from a fall, but then you do. because I don't really know how the game calculates the height Cal is from the ground in order to trigger a death barrier status. It's a little odd, so that's why I just have it enabled at all times, and there are a lot of situations where the enemies can force you off of the ledges, and it can be pretty frustrating if you're taking damage all the time. So that's why I have the option enabled. But essentially, by standing in this area, the enemies are not going to prioritize you, and they will prioritize Bode, and like I said, he cannot die, and he is very aggressive when dealing with the enemies. Same with Marin. I'm amazed the AI is so good in this game. But that being said, they can also be a hindrance during boss fights. Marin is especially frustrating whenever I'm trying to deal with Bode in this final boss fight encounter, because this guy right here, Bode, he's the final boss. I just don't understand why he's the final boss. Bode is a very interesting character, and he's wasted as a final boss fight. But getting back on track, Marin, during Bode's boss fight, can throw off the rhythm of the encounter, and she can trigger counter protocols that just make the fight even more douchey, and that's why I'm just glad that she goes away after a short amount of time in the first phase, and then you're dealing with Bode the rest of the time, because she's not a random variable to consider. So that's definitely one problem I have with the AI on this game. But when you have an AI companion with you, you have the ability to hold R1 and press square in order to get them to do a special ability where they will stun enemies, they will do a lot of damage to enemies, and it can be very helpful in complementing the combat, which is a cool idea. I do think there could have been more to do with the AI on this game, but for what it's worth, I think this is a pretty good baseline for the AI systems of this game. But right here, there's a probe droid. The way I fight probe droids is I try to use pull on them and then execute them with the attack button while they're busy being affected by pull, but I get screwed by bat detection, which is a problem with this game. So when you're holding onto enemies using pull, if you wait for them to get close to you and you wait until their class is being in a neutral state while they're being pulled, you can finish them off with the attack button, and Cal will do a unique animation. So in the case of stormtroopers or any of these humanoid enemies, if you grab onto them using pull and then press the attack button at the right moment once the animation has finished, Cal will stab the lightsaber into them like that. And then with the probe droids, Cal will do an uppercut and he will slice through the probe droid instantly and avoid triggering its suicide status, which will cause it to explode if you attack it. I was very fortunate that the first probe droid I dealt with, he went into the suicide status, yet for some reason he didn't detonate. I was very lucky. But the other one, at least I didn't get screwed by that because the detection on the execution animation worked in my favor. It's a really bizarre issue. I don't know why this game has that issue with the execution animation, because Jedi Fallen Order didn't have that issue. I mean, I played through Jedi Fallen Order. That's what I demonstrated in that playthrough I did. And I didn't encounter that issue once. Same with that right there. Did you notice how I stunned that guy and there was a weird circle on him? That's an indication that you can do an execution animation, and Cal will do a specific choreographed animation that kills the enemy, or he'll dismember a limb or do other things like that to weaken the enemy. But the detection on it is really bad in this game, and once again, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order did not have this issue with bad detection on execution animations. I don't understand why there are certain niggles in the system that hinder the fundamental mechanics more so with this game than in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. It's really weird. Like, watch this. This is an execution animation, a specific choreographed animation that triggers once you put that enemy into a weakened state and you get that little circle on them. I mean, that's what's normally supposed to happen, but the detection is just really bad in this game. I just don't understand why this game has certain problems that Jedi Fallen Order didn't have. That's why I'm saying this game is weaker in comparison to Jedi Fallen Order, because its mechanics are a little bit harder to trust, I would say. But right here, I'm going to stand at a distance, and I'm just going to reflect all these bolts back at the heavy gunner. And then I'm going to dispatch the rest of the enemies using pull. There's a probe droid right there, so I'm going to try to grab, but pull has limited range, so you got to get kind of close. And there's the execution animation. I at least waited until the probe droid was kind of raised in the air a little bit higher once he was pulled, and then I pressed square to do the execution animation. So that's when you normally have to wait, but oftentimes you don't have that time to wait because you could have other enemies attacking you while you're doing that, and that's just one of the main things that the developers should have realized, but I just don't understand why they missed that. And you know, they missed a lot of things as well. Like, this game is buggier than Jedi Fallen Order. Like, I get a lot of moments with input drops. I get a lot of moments where, for some reason, I get these moments where Cal just phases through the geometry. I get these moments where the textures take a while to load. I get certain low frame rate issues. I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, people have complained about the optimization on this game and some of the bugs, and I don't think the patches have done much. In fact, I honestly feel like the most recent patch for this game made the game more broken, but I don't know how best to describe it. And whether I'll be encountering these issues in the later parts of this walkthrough, I have no idea because I've only just recorded Coruscant. I haven't recorded the other areas yet. But we'll see what happens when I get to the next areas of the game. But we're just doing some parkour right now, and then we have a combat encounter right here. I think it's just a couple of blaster guys and a couple of melee guys. So I'm just going to run. I'm going to activate the shortcut like I always do, and I'm going to just try to peek around the corner right over here and just try to see where these enemies are while just keeping myself hidden. There is a stealth system in this game. I mean, it's not the best. Jedi Fallen Order didn't have any kind of stealth system. I mean, in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, the only way you were ever going to do anything reminiscent to a stealth kill was jumping on top of an unaware enemy and pressing square. But you can't actually do that animation by just escaping combat, waiting for the enemies to be unaware, and then doing it. You were only able to do it once, so it was just kind of an added thing. Nothing really important gameplay-wise. Whereas in Jedi Survivor, you have the ability to sneak up behind enemies and press square. And with certain enemies like the Stormtroopers, Cal will do a designated animation where he actually does a silent execution by stabbing them. I mean, it's not silent, though. Sometimes it can alert enemies, but a lot of the times, even when it seems noisy, the enemies never seem to get alerted, so it's very odd. I don't know what dictates whether the enemies hear the silent kill or not. It's odd. But then with the heavier enemies, or like the more heavy-tiered enemies, Cal will just do a really weird animation of stabbing them, and it does a bit more damage. The detection on it is not the best. I don't know why. It's very odd, even though it's literally tied to a button press that is actually triggered on top of an enemy. It's really weird. But you can also do aerial assassinations on enemies if they're not a high-tiered enemy. And yeah, there's a lot of options for that, and you can actually escape combat so long as you're in the open world. In certain story-specific combat encounters, you can escape the combat encounter, but you'll still be stuck in a combat status. But I'll explain those when we get to those particular encounters. But overall, there's definitely an added incentive to employ more guerrilla tactics, basically, when going through this game. And I think it's one of the more interesting additions of Jedi Survivor that can definitely help in doing certain encounters or dealing with certain enemies or just trying to mitigate the issues present with really dumb combat sequences. But we now have the grappling hook, so the grapple hook is just there for traversal. You can't use it in the middle of combat, which does kind of suck. I really wish you could use the grappling hook as a way to get rid of shields or something. It kind of sucks that with the shield guys, you have to use force pull. I can't really understand why Cal doesn't use the grapple hook. If it's strong enough to pull him, why can you not pull shields off? That just seems odd. And, you know, there could have been other opportunities to trip enemies using the grappling hook. It just feels like a Jedi thing to use that kind of device in very creative ways. It could have been an interesting avenue to take, but they just decided to not do it, which kind of sucks. But yeah, we're just using the grappling hook for traversal mainly, and then we have the wall runs. While you're wall running, you can actually jump away from the wall and then jump back onto the wall to initiate another wall run in case you're doing a very long wall running segment. I don't think you could do this in Jedi Fallen Order. Also, I'm just going to skip to the next part because all of that is just exposition, and there is some minor traversal here and there, but it's not really that important to include. But we're back in the open world, and we just lost our allies. I don't really understand why they try to characterize those allies and then immediately get rid of them. I'm not really sure why they would try to do that as a way to relate to Cal. Like, if you were using more significant characters, I could understand. But, I mean, I know Lasers felt something when these characters died. I didn't, unfortunately, so kind of sucks that that was the case. I just wish the screenplay was a little bit better with showcasing the deaths of those individuals to just make Cal go over to the dark side for a bit. I never really saw Cal as being someone who would go over to the dark side. I mean, he never really went over to the dark side in Jedi Fallen Order. I mean, there was that little sequence near the end of the game where Cal is reliving those moments where, as a teacher, he might put his Padawans in danger, and then he's also seeing his Inquisitor self. And I never really saw that as a hint that he would be going to the dark side, but apparently it was, and they touched upon it in this game, which was a little odd. But, as Lasers did describe in his review of Jedi Survivor, the Star Wars series has never explored the idea of someone being good using the dark side. So I think it's an interesting perspective to take with that. But we just have a couple of probe droids right there. We then have this guy. I did die on this part, which is why he's here, and then this door is already unlocked. So that's just something you can do, pretty much. You can deal with enemies, die, and then just go back from that meditation point and just run past them, and it's a lot simpler that way. I use Force Confusion right here. You will not see me use this move. I just use it here because this is where the tutorial tells you to do the move. But Force Confusion doesn't really work in the way I'm expecting it to work. The AI, when they're under the effects of the confusion, can still damage you, and they can also target you sometimes when there are no other enemies around, so what's the whole point of that? You're calling them your ally. Why are they attacking you? I mean, as long as that green aura is up, they should not deal damage to you, and they should not be attacking you out of the blue. As soon as that green aura goes away, that's when those parameters should go back to normal, but it's not the case in this game for some reason. That's why I don't use Force Confusion. Not to mention that you have to purchase upgrades to even make the move viable, but there are just far better Force moves to be using rather than Force Confusion. And I just don't feel like there are a lot of good enemy types where Force Confusion can be beneficial. So that's why I don't use that move. But I'm just going to hide right over here, and I'm going to dispatch these enemies one at a time, and this is definitely one of the uglier sides to this Souls-like combat that this game favors, because again, the combat systems that the Souls games favor, as well as with Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, are just not built for handling multiple enemies. Though in Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, if you have certain upgrades, you can dispatch multiple enemies. Like, for instance, there's a pull move that can allow you to pull multiple enemies towards you, and then you can probably follow up with a force attack, but I don't have that luxury, unfortunately, because I'm not using upgrades in this walkthrough. So instead, I'm just going to have to treat it like a traditional Souls format with just actively running away and just waiting for openings and just hoping that the forward momentum of my attacks doesn't put me into the attack of another enemy. It's just really awkward. This is why I don't like this particular combat system in a lot of games. There are far better games that have better combat systems for dealing with multiple enemies. But once those guys are down, I'm going to dispatch the guys with the blasters. I'm going to use Force Pull. This is definitely a great alternative to using the blaster. Like, you do have a lot more ranged options at your disposal compared to Jedi Fallen Order. I do feel like that was one of the weaker elements to the Jedi Fallen Order, because you didn't have a lot of ranged options, and so you were really hating Cal for not favoring more ranged options, and it really made you question why the Jedi don't use blasters or anything. I mean, I don't really understand the lore reason for that. Why do Jedi hate using blasters? I mean, I don't understand what's so disgraceful about using a blaster. I mean, Ezra used a blaster function in his lightsaber, and Kanan didn't bat an eyelid. So why do Jedi refrain from using blasters? I don't understand. But this right here was a death, so there's going to be a skip right here where I skip out on a cinematic moment where you use the grappling hook to grapple onto a ship and then start the Nine Sisters fight. So I'm instead just going to take this lift and deal with the Nine Sister, because the Nine Sister damaged me, and so she had to kill me. This Nine Sister fight is definitely a lot harder than in Jedi Fallen Order, but I do feel like there is some bull crap involved. So she opens up with a saber throw, so I'm going to block it, and then I'm going to get in close. I'm going to keep my guard up at all times, and I'm going to make sure I time my dodges correctly. So the way I deal with the Ninth Sister is I attack her until she parries me, and then I just dodge backwards or dodge to the side. Just watch her moves accordingly. So this move, I like to block it. And did you notice how after the second hit in that combo, she somehow hit me? For some reason, there's an additional attack in that combo, even though it's literally a setup animation to prepare for her next attack. I don't know why it works that way. That's not how that combo worked in Jedi Fallen Order. It's really weird. But we're now on this next phase, so in this part you can't damage her, because when she has her hand up to her head like this, she's just gonna predict your moves, so you gotta wait until she stops. And she'll normally try to grab you and to indicate that she's finished the animation, but now I'm just gonna deal with her. So this right here, get out of the way. You can't just simply back away like in Jedi Fallen Order. You have to get out of the way because it's a range attack this time. So just keep damaging her, wait until she parries you. She pushes me back, and then I'm going to dodge that jump attack. This right here, I'm just going to jump backwards. And right here, back up, block, block, parry. I did a parry just then with that third hit, which was an interesting idea. That enrage attack, you just got to dodge to the side. And now we're on this part. So this is where we get introduced to the split saber stance. So you're going to overwhelm the Ninth Sister greatly using this stance, but still keep your guard up. Because there can be those moments where out of the blue she can get a hit out on you, or you just get screwed by hyper armor or some animation canceling garbage. Yeah, pretty annoying. But just repeat the same process of attacking her until she decides to deflect you and then respond accordingly. Just be very aggressive with her. She backed up just then, and that was good because I can get some hits in on her. The white bar is about to decrease, which means her poise is going to be broken, so I can get some hits in on her. I blocked that saber throw just then. I'm going to use pull to drain her stamina, and now I'm going to be able to finish her off, or not. She pushes me back, and now we're on this part, so I just got to wait for her to finish her attack. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the force attack on this split saber function to mimic what the Ninth Sister does, where I can use foresight to predict her move and then immediately counter her attack. And it's just an automatic function, which is good. So there we go. She's down, and I got the hit out right there, and the fight is over. So that is the end of the Ninth Sister fight right there, and now we're going to move on. Very interesting how she comes back. I really thought we killed her in Jedi Fallen Order, but Laser saw that as an interesting idea because it's meant to showcase the despair that Cal feels knowing that his efforts to hinder the Empire have been for naught, because the Empire is still very powerful, and having the Ninth Sister return is yet another aspect to that particular character trait of Cal at this moment in time, and I think it's a very interesting idea that Laser's brought up. I mean, having an enemy that you thought was dead return out of the blue, that's bound to trigger a lot of shock and despair in you, and I can definitely see that in Cal now that I actually heard that in Laser's review. It's a really good review as well. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the parts where he talks about the other shows because I don't want my enjoyment of the other shows to be tainted by what he has to say. But at least he doesn't talk so much about the other shows. I mean, I don't know how much he likes the new Disney Star Wars shows and movies. I know he hates the sequel trilogy. I don't know why people give the sequel trilogy a lot of flack. I know Episode 9 is bad, and I did rewatch Episode 9, and it wasn't that good at all. I mean, Episode 7 was fun. Episode 8 was pretty fun. I mean, I don't really see why The Last Jedi is hated. I mean, that's probably because I haven't read the comics or anything. I've mainly watched the movies, but I thought Last Jedi was an interesting concept with Luke Skywalker. I mean, Luke Skywalker feeling that kind of despair in his old age. I mean, that's an interesting idea to take that kind of character. And in all honesty, guys, I don't even like Luke. Like, I never liked Luke in the original trilogy. I thought he was just a bit of a goofball. But in Boba Fett, he was amazing. In Mandalorian, he was amazing. And Last Jedi, this more cynical side to Luke was an interesting perspective to take. And, you know, tying it into Kylo Ren, I mean, that's a cool idea. I don't see anything wrong with that. Maybe people had problems with the execution of that idea. I don't know. I know people had a huge problem with that hyperspace scene where Admiral Holdo was able to destroy that entire Imperial fleet using the hyperdrive of that big ship she was on. But I believe the lore reason for that was she didn't just use the hyperdrive, she used the shield generator, and, you know, like, you know, there's more energy produced when you're at a fast speed, so I'm guessing the increased speed gained by going into hyperspace amplified the energy emanating from the massive shield generator she was using for her ship, and so that multiplied the energy provided by that shield generator, and the kinetic energy was so huge, it decimated the entire Imperial fleet. I mean, I believe that's what the reason was, and that's why in Episode 9, they said that the Holdo maneuver was like a 1 in a million chance. So that's why it's not a regular thing that soldiers do, because it's pretty hard to recreate. The explanation they gave in Episode 9 could have been a lot better, but I didn't have a problem with the Holdo maneuver in Star Wars The Last Jedi. Like, I've always wondered why more pilots don't use the hyperdrive as like a suicide tactic to deal with a lot of incoming enemy vessels. And seeing that demonstrated was very interesting when I first saw that movie. And I rewatched that movie a couple of times because, I mean, like, there's a lot of scenes that I do like. You know, when Luke is explaining the folly of the Jedi Order and that he realized just how arrogant the Jedi Order was during the Clone Wars, and that eventually led to their downfall and allowing Darth Sidious to return to power. I mean, it's very interesting for that kind of old character to recollect upon the mistakes of the Jedi Order back during the Clone Wars. I mean, what a cool idea. And then having the catalyst for these kind of doubts come from Kylo Ren betraying Luke, and like Luke sensed the dark side within him, and so he thought about killing Kylo Ren, but then hesitated at the last moment because he was giving in to that same kind of weakness that the original Jedi Order had. I mean, that's an interesting idea. I mean, I don't know why people hate The Last Jedi. It's odd. If someone could explain in the comment section down below why people hate The Last Jedi, I'd really appreciate it. But right here, I'm just letting Bravo and Bode take out most of the enemies. Bravo's really good here. His sniper rifle is so powerful. It kills enemies in one hit. And so you can just sit behind cover, wait for him to line up the shot, and then fire at enemies. And he can take out so many of the enemies. And you can just avoid taking damage altogether. And sometimes there can be enemies that will sneak through Bravo's firing line. It's about to happen shortly because a couple of stormtroopers are coming after me right now. But I'm going to be able to dispatch them easily. Ooh, the guys with the batons right here, this is important to note. You have the ability to do precision evades, where if you time your dodge at the right moment by simply pressing the dodge button and not using the left analog stick alongside the dodge button, you can do these special evades that will slow down time for a bit, and you'll also get force energy back. And this can be very helpful during certain sequences if you need to replenish upon your blaster, because the blaster requires you to damage enemies in order to refill it, or through other means as well. So using the precision evade to replenish upon your force energy and also your blaster ammunition is a really good technique, and using those particular enemies is helpful because their attacks are very easy to predict and they're easy to avoid because they have some really slow attacks. But right now, we have a Purge Trooper and a couple of other Stormtroopers. I'm going to use Bow to get rid of the Purge Trooper. This guy's getting close, so I use Slow to open him up, and then he's done. And then Bo's going to finish off the last guy, and that will be the end of Coruscant. And I'm just going to transition over to Kobo. I'm going to sit at this meditation point, and that will be the end of the video. So once again, welcome to my walkthrough. Stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.